Hey everyone, welcome back to the Unspoken. This is the podcast that aims to discuss everything not discussed surrounding transplant and donation. First, I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone that's followed and subscribed already. If you haven't and you like the content of this podcast, please hit that subscribe or follow button. It really helps us bring more guests on and continue this podcast. This week, I am going to be speaking with Stacy, is the Director of Quality and Donation Operations for the Rocky Mountain Lions Eye Bank, and Leslie is a eye tissue donor mother. So I'm really excited to have them on to delve into the world of eye donation and transplant and really learn more about probably the area, you hear a lot about organ transplants and you hear a lot about tissue transplants in this field. So eye donation, I think, is one that, I've at least heard a lot of people have either concern or questions, more questions surrounding becoming an eye donor. So I'm really excited to get them on the podcast and learn a little more. Before we dive into that with them, let's look at what CKF has coming up. First, Summit for Life is right around the corner. If you haven't signed up already to hike up the hill with us on December 6th, it is the biggest event in Aspen to kick off winter, and it celebrates the gift of life. We're always so excited to have new people head up the hill. If you're not a hiker, you can also ride the gondola too, and there is a big party and celebration at the top. So December 6th at 5:30, if you want a fun evening for all the family to get involved with, sign up today. Next, as we look into 2026, we are going to be opening up orders for our Sip and Save campaign. If you haven't already got involved in Sip and Save, it is a huge event on National Donor Day that CKF hosts. We help you go into your local community and have coffee shops participate. And by doing this, through doing this, we provide them with coffee sleeves with a QR code so people can register right there. We also provide posters and stickers and all these other things to educate the general community about what it means to register as an organ donor. So if you would like to place an order, you're going to head to our website, Chris Klug Foundation /donor dudes. So with all of that being said, as we turn the new year, I also want to remind everyone, if you haven't ticked that box already, please do so. It can help save 8 lives or change the lives of 75. Let's bring on today's guests and start talking about eye donation. Well, first I want to start by saying a huge thank you to our guest speakers today for joining me. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I think it's something that we always get asked about is eye donation. I think it's a little different to some of, maybe organ donation or tissues that other people have donated. So I think it's really great to start this conversation and give it a new platform. So first, I'm going to start with Stacy. Can you explain the eye donation process and, what it may look like from the start from a donation perspective all the way through to kind of transplant, what that might look like?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the Rocky Mountain Lions Eye Bank will get notified when someone passes away from a hospital or other facility. At that point, we also find out if they're registered donor or not registered donor. If they're not a registered donor, we will give the family a call to let them make the decision for their loved ones. We hope that they're making that decision based on what they think their loved one would truly want. Once we have consent or authorization, we're going to be going out to the facility to do the recovery, which is a sterile surgical procedure. Our technicians go through pretty rigorous training to learn how to do the techniques, and utmost care and respect is a top priority for our technicians with doing the procurement. Once we do the procurement at the hospital, the tissue is then brought back to our lab, which it goes through strict evaluations for health of the tissue itself as well as the donor. There is not a wait list currently for quality of transplants in the U.S. So usually the wait is with the surgeon scheduling the procedure, not for the tissue itself. So as soon as the tissue is ready for transplant, we will match it up with the recipient, typically based on age, and then it goes to local surgeons first, then domestic, and then internationally if you have enough tissue.
That's incredible. It's so different to like the organ world where it's, there's a wait for transplant and the fact that we can do it both locally but also internationally. That's really impressive.
Yeah, we're really lucky in Colorado and Wyoming. People are very generous. They've signed up to be on the donor registry, basically giving the ultimate sacrifice to another human. So we often have enough tissue to share domestically as well as internationally.
That's incredible. Brad and Leslie, I'm going to come over to you guys now. You were two of those really generous people that made that decision to help change someone's lives. Can you walk us through your personal experiences being a donor family?
Well, Morgan.
She did. So we actually have a picture right up here of Morgan's original driver's permit. And I remember when Morgan was young and she was getting ready to drive, she was going through all of the materials because that was Morgan. Very meticulous, studied everything. And she actually came to us and said, "Hey, did you know that you can donate your organs and eyes?" And we said, "Yes, actually we did, because we are organ and transplant donor." He said, "Yes." I guess there was some root to it. And we had the same heart on our driver's license. So she was fascinated by that because Morgan had some other health issues at the time. And she thought, wow, this is really great. I can be involved in something regardless of my current health status. And that was a big, big deal. So we had this really great conversation about just donation and what that meant if he said yes. And that's really how it all started. Just she went in, she said yes at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and we thought everything would just move along. I think much like all families do, I think we never thought twice about what would happen down the road, but we're always going to be grateful that we had the conversation at that time.
I think that's key. I love that you guys had that conversation because it's so important and it's something that we don't see happen a lot with young people is having the conversation early before, you're faced with making a decision. So, Stacey, how does it look when you coordinate with the hospitals and the medical professionals? What does that relationship look like during the donation process?
Working with the hospitals, coroner's office, funeral homes is essential for us. We have really good looks with the hospitals in our area. Without the nurses and the staff there at the hospitals, our process would not work. Most hospitals let us do the procurement of the eye tissues at their facility as well. So we often are there visiting with them as well.
Leslie and Brad, what were your initial feelings? Obviously it's a really scary process at the beginning and becoming a donor family is something you never want to do, but how did your initial feelings evolve during the process?
I think, kind of laying back to your previous question too, I think it was important that, we had the conversation with our daughter 9 years or whatever before 12 years before she passed. So I think that's a real important process for anyone. I mean, you don't ever want bad things to happen, right? But they do. At least having that early level of, kind of thought behind the donation process, I think is really critical. So if I were to encourage any family, when you're renewing a driver's license, that type of thing, and you mark your license for donation, then you share that with your family members so that they know in advance, so that conversation, if bad things happen, that are unexpected or even expected, you're somewhat prepared for it on a little level, because you're dealing, at least on the rational side, right? Emotional side's totally different. And, and early in our process, Leslie had been working with Stacy and Colorado Eye Bank and with the hospital simultaneously. So we kind of knew, because Morgan wanted to do donations, right? And for me, there was a point in there where I'm just signing papers and Leslie's handling people. And so it's really good to have family connect.
And I think, like the question about initial feelings, when we talked about, Brad and I sat down and talked about these questions just a little bit. The initial feeling was like she was a young woman getting her driver's license. Like, you're excited. You're obviously a little nervous about your child in a car by themselves, but you're excited. And there's this initial level of enthusiasm that believe it or not, actually carries into this process of donation. So as Brad mentioned, our daughter was at St. Joseph Hospital, and the spiritual care team was amazing because she had several requests that would entail a lot of coordination around different kinds of donation. And they gave us the numbers that we needed. And I'll never forget, I met Stacy. I literally had pulled into the parking lot at St. Joseph Hospital, and I would try to make some calls ahead of going up to our daughter's room. And she had asked if I had called her. And so I made a call from my car in the hospital parking lot and ended up talking to Stacy. I've always believed that there was a reason that you were on the other end of that line, because it took this process of almost like I've got to get this done for our daughter into this realm of she was such a person, and you were so thoughtful in curating our conversation about delicately walking through all the nuances that would actually take place, while also talking to me about Morgan. And I felt like I had known you for a long period of time. And I remember watching cars going back and forth in that parking lot, thinking, what a surreal moment that I'm in this parking lot having this conversation about what will be in an undefined time period at that point, but it will occur. And Stacy's just so beautifully talking to me about the process and reassuring me of everything along the way, that it just felt, I know this will sound strange, it felt natural. It felt like this is supposed to be what the next step is. And there was a reason that she had said yes to being a donor. On top of that, our daughter also had requested that her eye donation go to a very good friend of hers, a surrogate sister. And Stacy just hung in there through that conversation and was like, do you know what the mitigating factor is in her friend losing her sight? And we're on the phone. I'm texting Morgan to find out from her friend Sydney what it is without Sydney knowing why we were asking. You just stuck through all of that. And so initially there's enthusiasm because everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in the beginning, there is enthusiasm. And this was like that middle part conversation of donation, where when I went back upstairs and explained to Morgan that we would not be able to donate to her friend, and what did she want to do to go further, she just said, that means my eyes are that for somebody else. She didn't even hesitate. And then I remember we had this great conversation about you, Stacy, in this full process. And it was like, that's when the rubber meets the road, so to speak. You have to make a decision then through that conversation of what the choice will be. Because as the end nears, you have to be able to know that those things will go into motion, because you don't want to have the emotion of a death and a decision in the end.
I remember that phone call. I remember just sitting in the office. I couldn't believe how strong you and your family and Morgan were to be able to talk about this and decide these things during this time for your family. I myself have children, and so I was I particularly remember your strength and just kindness. Could feel it over the phone, and I knew right then that you were meant to talk and to stay in touch. And I was really grateful to have that conversation.
It's turned out to be this wonderful piece of an ongoing story that you don't know. And I think that's a key part in the process is initially, again, there's enthusiasm. Then there is the decision point when you're at that moment. Do you lean in and stick with what you decided, or are you going to not? And we were able to lean in because of the strength of the conversation with you and the reassurance around all of that. And then you were so kind because you said, send me a photo of your daughter. And I thought, wow, in some cases, I think people probably think donation is almost a numbers game, if I can be that honest. And they think, well, there's just a lot of it out there and you are a number in a system. And what you did was dispel that completely and humanize it. So you felt like this is something that is going to be a beautiful next chapter rather than something that you literally checked off the list for your loved one.
I think oftentimes families in the toughest days, the hardest situations, donation can provide a little bit of comfort, knowing that their loved one is going to leave a legacy and help someone else. Cornea donation, maybe it didn't save someone's life, but it sure enhanced it. That person can now thrive. They can work, provide for themselves and their family. They can see their, loved ones or children if they have them. So it's a pretty powerful gift to say yes to.
It is beyond that. I mean, Morgan was a voracious reader, and as her health declined through the years, books became her world, and it was a connection point with caregivers, with everyone. And so, in our minds, somebody having the ability to continue to read, was really paramount. It's a part of independence that allows you to go to places and spaces at any time you want. And so that was just in our mind, and her eyes were very important to them. She thought at different points in her treatment, for example, that she would lose her hair and her eyelashes. And she was like taking pictures of her eyes so that she could see her lashes. And then the doctors were like, no, you have this, we're going to take care of it. Her girlfriends were rushing around finding, the serums that you could buy to keep the lashes. But eyes mattered to her because even as her health changed, her eyes did not. They really remained a window to her soul.
Thank you both. You both said that so beautifully, and thank you for being so honest and sharing, those intricacies. And I think you touched on something important. It's important having somebody walking you through the process that truly cares and wants to get to know you and your family and your loved one, because it is such a difficult time, and that can kind of set it at ease a little better.
The other thing that was helpful was Stacy told me not only about the process, but what to expect at the time of her death, and that there would be a phone call within 30 minutes. And like that sounds like something that's just a point, if you will. But when you are in that moment, it's really important because you realize within 30 minutes of losing your loved one, their life is going to continue in a different way. That is a pivotal.
Talking to family members is truly a great honor. The staff member that you have here, it's probably, one of the more fulfilling things that we get to do on a daily basis. It's pretty special, and there's always those family members that maybe stick out a little bit more, form a connection with. And I think I was lucky enough to have, that moment with you that day.
Beyond. It really was beyond.
Thank you both. That was amazing. Stacy, a lot of our listeners, or a lot of, what we focus on has been organ donation, and tissue donation. And I think we're really keen to bring eye donation more into the light. And there is some differences between organ donation and eye donation and the process. Can you kind of speak to that for a minute, how that might differ?
Specifically with eye tissue, I think some people hesitate to register to be a donor because they think they may not be eligible, or they think they may have poor eyesight, maybe too old. I always tell people not to discount or to don't count themselves out, because with eye tissue, it's pretty special. Even folks that have poor eyesight, a lot of health problems, are able to donate because the tissue is avascular, meaning there's no blood supply. So there's no tissue matching involved with eye tissue donation. Just this last year, we had a donor that was blind their whole life, able to donate their corneas. So I tell people, if they decide to be a donor, which whatever you decide is fine. If you decide yes, though, don't count yourself out because you have health problems.
Including cataracts.
Yeah, cataracts.
That was something we didn't know.
I did not know any of that. That's incredible to hear. And I would imagine as well that, given that there's no blood supply, it helps with, there's a few religions that have specific, laid out plans in terms of donation because of blood. And so I would imagine that opens it up for them as well to become eye donors.
Yeah.
Leslie and Brad, I'm going to come back to you. Is there any advice, having been through the process that you could give to a family that, maybe is considering or is in the process or ultimately may face becoming a donor family? What advice would you give to them?
Talk about it. Don't make it a mystery. Anything else, as your children are born and grow, you try so hard to shelter them in so many ways. And yet you need to desensitize them to a lot of realities in the world. And I feel like talking about eye and tissue donation, it sounds like a strange dinner conversation, but it's really important to do that because when you desensitize it, and it becomes more of something that is talked about, then it isn't scary. And I was asked in a separate interview about this, and I said, what came to my mind and just stuck to me was, we had the luxury of time. And I mean that sincerely. You had the luxury of some time, and most people do not. So even if everything looks like life is rosy, have the conversation, like at the driver's license time period, when they're getting ready to go off to college, whatever, when you're considering your own choices for yourself later in life. Anytime you can have that conversation, or just, like I said, more normalizing. Like, we didn't really know about Rocky Mountain Lions Day. And so through all of this, learning about it and learning about how many more aspects are involved. There's Circle of Life photography contest, the different things they do to support caregivers in hospitals. Like, that's what really connects it to the here and now. And it extrapolates a lot of the fear factor. And I feel like that is the barrier, right? Because even with Morgan, we had friends of ours say, what are you going to do? And the first thing we said was, well, we'll follow what Morgan provided. And then we spent a lot of time talking about it. And so what that's helped us with is we have a son who's 20, and he talks about things in a completely different realm now because we've been through this process. And so however you can work it into a conversation, listen to this conversation and bring it up, but leave the conversation, ask the question, even if it's uncomfortable and it sits on the table, so to speak, because nobody really wants to pick it up. Keep talking about it. Because that's when it becomes more like, this is a really important decision that is going to change so many things in a family's life, but also in other families' lives. And I think with children in particular, they're very focused on themselves, as they should be, right? And they're worried about how their hair is looking and do they have the right style and all of those things. Well, this is something that can become a conversation point. They're capable of having it, and we want to shelter them from the probability of that. When in reality, I think that actually makes it more of the side, like, ooh, keep that out here. That's something I don't want to think about or draw into, but we can talk about. Then it's like, it's real, and you all have expressed your feelings around it. And if you honor them, then if you are at a point where you have to make a decision, whether it was with the luxury of time or in the moment, it's happened.
For the parents that are watching or the adults in the room, just lead the conversation. You got teenagers that are learning to drive or whatever. You may not have a lot of time. And so just find out what the wishes are of each individual and do that early. And so that if something were to occur, you're at least a little more prepared. So.
And talk about yourself within that conversation. It's really important. Yeah, I think that really hits home on our side. I think some of the biggest barriers that we run into is when someone did not share their decision with their family member, and the surprise of a call comes from us. And, that's not an easy thing for anybody. And so it's really great that you were able to have that conversation early, because it's not being done right now.
And again, that's the normalizing of like this place, right? And having conversations like this that people can learn more about. Oh, this is Stacy. This is a person. This is the face, right? This is the person you talk to. Those are the things that make the people lean in more to the conversation, or more likely to check out maybe your website or whatever it might be, or ask other people if they've made that decision. For all the things our society is wonderful about talking about, it's interesting that you still naturally have a hard time talking about the idea that somebody might not be with us as long as we like and down. And yet that is a part of the life cycle. And so anywhere where you could just, and part of the reason why you like these pictures, our daughter is just a human being and she's just a normal kiddo. So a lot of people, I think she was special, right? Because you do get the opportunity to be talking to you and other people. And we're like, no, she was just a normal 28-year-old woman that was trying to figure out, what was going to be her next step in her career, and trying to meet the right man in her life, and, very fashion forward, and loved music, and just normal human being. She was just a regular person who said, I want to do this. So
Really powerful. Yeah, I think my thing that always happens when we're out at events talking to people is when we start that conversation between a child and a parent, and you watch it happen right there in front of you. And the mom turns to the daughter, or the daughter turns to the mom and says, I'm a donor, or I want to be a donor. I think when we were at last summer, there was about a 5-year-old boy who said, when I grow up, I want to be a donor. And I'm like, that we got somewhere, because they're going to go home and keep having that conversation now, because it started in the family dynamic. It's incredibly
that's during
important.
family dynamic. And then when you have somebody like Morgan that was younger, this has had reverberations throughout her community, right? And we still are fortunate enough as parents to have so many of those younger people in our life and connected. And they've expressed to us how it changed their thinking. And so that's the other thing that people don't realize. You can do a lot of posts. And when information went out about Morgan being an eye donor, it was electrifying, because it really spread the information out in a palatable way to her peers or to anybody who was following her. And yeah, so yes to the family starting it, and yay when it can be authentic and go further from either the family or the donor themselves.
I think you do like to do what your friends do. So it makes sense when you can, you've made a decision that'll inspire your friends to consider doing the same. That's
Right.
powerful.
Becomes a trend. I mean that if you can get it into the conversation and such, then why would it not be something that other people will at least have heard it and think, well, if they did it,
Stacy, what are some of the common misconceptions that people have about becoming an eye donor, and how do you maybe address some of those?
I may have talked about it a little bit, but I think some people are just hesitant to sign up because they think they're too sick, or they're too old, or they wear glasses, or they've had cataract surgery, those type of things. And I would say if you're interested in being a donor, helping someone else, that to sign up, don't count yourself out. Especially with the nature of eye tissue, folks that are pretty ill, cancer can be a donor, which is really different from organ and other tissue donation. So if you're interested in helping someone else, doing something that ultimate gift, I would say to sign up. Eye tissue is quite special.
I think when we were walking through the lab before we started this webinar, we were kind of learning some new things too about eye donation. I was surprised that you could have had cataract surgery prior and still be able to donate. There's all these different criteria you think that would eliminate you from being able to donate your eyes, which really are not a factor. So it's almost like, because our daughter was so sick that she could not donate other organs for transplant. However, the eyes were totally removed from that process, and she could. It was the one thing that she could donate to somebody else, which is really pretty amazing.
I think that's special, being able to donate something, the pretty incredible thing to donate of anything. I think it is sort of it's the part of you that connects you to your soul. I think it's such a special thing to be able to pass on to somebody else and change their life from it. Brad and Leslie,
Or when Lovely said Morgan wasn't special, I was thinking special. She's a hero.
yeah,
Restored hope for two people by restoring their vision. The little things like we all take for granted. The folks that are getting the tissue, it can be totally life changing for them. And so, in my eyes, Morgan is special and she's a hero. And I'm grateful as well for supporting her decision. That's awesome. Thank you.
And and I understand why you say that. Like I said, to us, it was just something that you would do. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want kindness to be the new outlier, if you will.
Mhm.
And I think that's what I was going at, was for us, she was a typical young lady. It didn't surprise us that she wanted to donate at all. She would always be helping wherever she could, and she was fascinated by it. I think another piece in this is I look at people differently because when somebody has a donated kidney or something like that, there's a lot involved in it. And it seems like a lot of people don't have to have it. But when it's an eye donation, it just sort of happens. And you could be walking through the grocery store and be talking to somebody who has had cornea transplant would never know it. Because it's just there's not scarring. Do you know what I mean? There's none of the typical things that I think people associate with donation.
Mm-hmm.
Anti-rejection medications, any of those things, they just are a part. It's just this beautiful narrative of thank you for this tissue, and now it's going to go on for the next person and continue to do the work that it was meant to do. So I look at people, I know that will sound strange, but differently because I think, wow, you could be a recipient and I would never know that. And that's pretty cool when you get down to it, to know that like that's how clean the process is and pure and obviously not to.
I've never really thought of it that way, but until now, and then now, yes. I think eye donation, it should be the staple of everything we do. And then, it's so beautiful and there's no scarring afterwards. And there's none of that, kind of hard side that comes with some of the other organ donation or transplant process. Brad and Leslie, you've kind of mentioned this as we've gone through, but how has the act of your daughter becoming a donor changed or affected your family afterwards?
I think after suffering a loss, you see that good came of it, right? I think that's the best thing, at least for me anyway.
And I think that I believe that Morgan is aware of the amazing connections and relationships that we have now that we would never have had you not gone through this experience in your life. And so you really do have to make a decision when the person you love leaves you. Are you going to move forward or are you going to stay paralyzed? And that is something that families need to think about. And it's not that it's easy, but it's important. And what you get from it can't be described in words. When we got the letter that told us that Morgan's eyes had been received by a person in Saudi Arabia, like first tears, and then we giggled because we're like, she wanted to travel internationally. So of course she would go to Saudi Arabia. It's like such a neat thing. And you find yourself from time to time thinking about person is cruising around in life, like doing their thing because she said it was okay to do that. And then just meeting Stacy and all of the people and all the different walks that I hope help a little bit. And then our own education has grown exponentially, our interest has grown exponentially. And you go through that time where everything is very, very heavy. And then you start stepping into these things and you start recognizing, oh no, everything does move forward. And when it does it in such an incredibly beautiful manner. And like I said, seamlessly. That person could walk into this room that has Morgan's eye issue, and we would never know. That's what's really unique, is you just know that it has done its purpose, and that you can always think about that and talk to them. Many people want to know what happens afterward. So the opportunities to be able to have those conversations with family and friends, and have people just that you don't know have reached out and contacted us that I never knew anything about this, and I'd like to know more. So many times over, it's paid itself forward in such a way that it really helps you in that healing process. But again, we had such a remarkable experience with it that how could we not have had something good happen with everything that's occurred here with our time and with you and so it's been amazing.
So, we take so many things for granted, besides being one of them. Waking up every morning, can, go about your daily functions. I was just reading a poster over here on the other side of the moon about a gal that had, I don't know how you pronounce it, Fuchs.
Yeah.
Yeah, Fuchs, and how she tripped over a curb. I think she had already had one donation. She was still blind on the other side, and trips over a curb. Things that, we do function every day that you just take for granted. Just walking, driving, left, right. If you're an artist, drawing, just all those things that bring the world, to you. And that she received her second donation, and now I'm assuming she's not tripping over and she's living a normal life. And that's a great, that's really cool.
Mhm.
So very important, so when you have the opportunity, donate.
There you go.
Yeah, we had a recipient and he talked with a lot, and they're so grateful for their cornea transplant. And the one thing that stuck out to me that she said is, you never know who you're going to help.
That's right.
And I think that message was pretty powerful for me, just in all aspects of life. Doing day-to-day things and showing kindness. And I just meant a lot to me. And you said that.
Definitely. And Saudi Arabia is a beautiful country. It's one of my top countries I've ever been to. It is stunning to be.
It's good to know.
Yep.
I see
Stacey,
it in photos. Yeah.
I'm going to sort of come to you now. What motivates you? I mean, working in this field motivates you every day, but what really gets you into work every day, and what makes you want to make a difference to people's lives?
It's always been different things throughout the years that have stuck out, more than others. My dad passed away, and he was a eye tissue donor 13 or so years ago. I've been here for about 11 years. I think I have always found it pretty easy to connect with people, especially in high stressful, emotional situations. I think, there can be some hard days working in this kind of field, but I would say more often you feel grateful. The connections and the things that I've learned over the years about people and their loved ones has been things that I'll take with me forever, no matter what field that I work in. So I think at the end of the day, coming to work, knowing that we're going to restore hope for someone do the normal activities, see their grandkids, see their family members. That's what keeps me coming in every day.
You. Thanks for sharing that. I always like to ask people. I kind of fell into the field, and then I ended up getting a connection while I was in it. My brother-in-law is a heart recipient. My other brother-in-law donated when he passed, and it was something I kind of fell into. And then suddenly I was going, well, this is something I actually really care about, and something I, want to stay in my whole life. And so I think it's always interesting to hear people's whys as well. I have a tradition on the podcast when we finish, I always like to ask our speakers to leave one piece of advice for our listeners. Most of them are recipients or candidates or donor families. And if you could leave one piece of advice with them, whether they're waiting or just received a transplant or are a family, what piece of advice would you leave with them?
Advice I would leave is, a lot of, the awareness is, of course, important. When Stacey had just mentioned her dad. My dad passed away almost 23 years ago and had no idea about eye transplant or cornea transplant, just opportunity, because he had really good eyes. And yet in our family, we've got other family members who, a kidney transplant, for example. And of course, we have a friend who has a double cornea transplant that we didn't really know about until fairly recently, the last couple of years. And I would say, don't miss out on opportunity. So, especially if you've got a family member, like you had mentioned, that has had a transplant. So then it's not a foreign thing. And now, everybody can get on board, right? And I would say that's the most important thing. It's just really get everybody on board that because the old saying, you can't take it with you, right? And even though it's our loved one that's, lying there, sitting there, whatever, that, they're gone. But some good can really still come from their life they have.
I think that's a tough question because there's so many facets to distill and pick like one thing. Wow. Because I'm listening to what you're saying, Brad, and I agree. I feel like one, as I've said earlier, even though it will perhaps challenge you to your soul to have this subject matter or to talk about it, particularly with your children, because you don't want anything to ever happen to them. It's so important to talk to them about it. We talk about so many things to protect them. And two, if you're going to do that, do what you need to do to make it easier for yourself. So talk to people like us, talk to people like Stacey, go to websites, do your own education, do whatever you need to do to come to a place where your soul is comfortable. And then that conversation will flow. If you don't ever start the conversation, the beauty of everything that has happened in our lives as Morgan, Stacey, and I think will not occur.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but as far as the Rocky Mountain Lions, I think the decision is yours, but truly what's really important is sharing that decision with your loved ones and family members so they can support whatever decision that you make. I think is just the biggest message I can get out there today.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
I love when people sound like a broken record for a great cause. That's what we're all here for, right? Well, I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for joining me today and for all of our listeners tuning in. As always, we hope that you stay safe and stay healthy and continue to live life, give life.